All right. Welcome, Jody, Tracy, Frankie. Hello, Caitlin. We are in Deuteronomy chapter 3. We just talked about King Sihon, which they had defeated in chapter 2. Now we're moving on to King Og. And this looks a little lengthy too. Mine breaks at 22. Where do you guys have breaks?
I have a break. Mine goes from 1 to 11 and then 12 to what? 20, I think. And then 21 to the rest of the chapter.
Okay,
Mine's the same as yours.
why don't we do to 11 then? That's a little shorter, I think. 3. Yeah, because Tony breaks after 11 also, so that will work. Is everybody okay with that?
Yes.
Could someone read then Deuteronomy chapter 3, verses 1 through 11?
Do you want me to do that since I don't have any other
Sure, Kim, thank you.
commentary?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Next, we turn toward King Og's land of Bashan. He immediately mobilized his army and attacked us at Edrei. But the Lord told me not to be afraid of him. All his people and his land are yours, the Lord told me. You will do to him as you did to King Sihon of the Amorites at Heshbon. So the Lord helped us fight against King Og and his people, and we killed them all. We conquered all 60 of his cities, the entire Argob region of Bashan. These were well-fortified cities with high walls and barred gates. Of course, we also took all of the unwalled towns. We utterly destroyed the kingdom of Bashan, just as we had destroyed King Sihon's kingdom at Heshbon, killing the entire population, men, women, and children alike. But we kept the cattle and loot for ourselves. We now possessed all the land of the 2 kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan River, all the land from the valley of the Arnon to Mount Hermon. The Sidonians called Mount Hermon Sirion, while the Amorites called it Senir. So we have Mount Hermon, Sirion, and Senir all being the same thing. Okay, we had now conquered all the cities on the plateau and all of Gilead and Bashan as far as the cities of Salekah and Edrei. Incidentally, King Og of Bashan was the last of the giant Rephaim. His iron bedstead is kept in a museum at Rabbah, one of the cities of the Amorites, and measures 13.5 feet long by 6 feet wide.
So they're saying he was one of the giants?
Yes.
Sounds like it.
His name was Rephaim, Rephaim. And wonder if his bed's still in a museum. That would be something, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Is it not? Yeah, I don't know. I guess we'll find out here.
Wait, 13 feet long.
You need to stretch, apparently. Mine says 9 cubits, so yours says 13 feet?
Yes.
Mine says 13 feet long and 6 feet wide.
Yes.
Yeah, mine says a cubit was about 18 inches or 45 centimeters.
He must have been a giant.
So you say 13 feet long?
Yes.
I think we read yesterday that in Og, these people were giants. I thought we read somewhere too.
All right. Cindy lost electricity.
Oh.
Fortunately, I have John here, so I'll do 3 through 1 through 11. And then Kathy, if you want to do Worsby, and then I'll go back to Tony. Bashan, a fertile region, this is verse 1, located east of the Sea of Galilee, and the Jordan River extending from Mount Hermon in the north to the Yarmuk River in the south Israel, met King Og and his army in battle at Edrei, a city on the Yarmuk River. The Amorite king ruled over 60 cities, which were taken by Israel. This kingdom was assigned to the Transjordanic tribes, especially the half tribe of Manasseh. I guess I never thought about these tribes would have these huge sections of land. Like I just thought of them like camping. You know what I mean? Like,
You notice they had trans back then.
yeah, I thought that too when I read that. Transjordanic tribes, especially the half tribe of Manasseh. And then he jumps to verse 8. So he skips all those in between there. This side of the Jordan, east of the Jordan River, Israel controlled the territory from the Arnon River to Mount Hermon, a length of about 150 miles. Note that the perspective of the speaker was to the east of the Jordan, and the west of the Jordan still needed to be conquered. This statement helps date these speeches as pre-conquest. What does that mean? So they hadn't captured it yet?
As I say, I think that means before they conquered whoever.
And then 311, the iron bedstead. The bedstead may actually have been a coffin, which would have been large enough to also hold tomb objects. The size of the bedstead, 13.5 by 6 feet, emphasized the largeness of Og, who was a giant, the last of the Rephaim, a race of giants. As God had given Israel victory over the giant Og, so he would give them victory over the giants in the land. Interesting that he was the last of those giants.
I wonder if it just means those giants of the Rephaim race.
Yeah,
That doesn't necessarily mean of all, but of that
right.
race.
But it's interesting, how did he make it to king if he was the only one? All right, Kathy, that was all John had to say.
Actually, the through 11, which we just read, 1 through 11,
Yeah.
was included in what I read yesterday for where it started at 224.
Oh, okay. So you
But
don't
I
need,
can, I say I can reread it if you want me to, but that was all included in with defeating the Amorites.
so did you feel there's anything there that's sticking out to you now?
No, not in particular as far as what we just read.
Okay. All right, well then I'll do Tony and then we can move on to the next section. Verses 1 through 7, it says, another Amorite king whom the Israelites encountered was Og of Bashan. Like Sihon, Og came out against Israel with his whole army to do battle. And as in Sihon's case, God had already determined to give the king, along with his whole army and his land, into Israel's hands. Israel destroyed all the people and captured all 60 cities in Og's kingdom, which also had the same high walls as Sihon. High-walled cities were no barrier when God decided to hand an enemy over to his people. The most spectacular example of that truth would come later in the city of Jericho in Joshua 6, 1 through 21, verses 8 through 11. Israel defeated Sihon and Og and took possession of their vast lands on the east side of the Jordan. Then Moses added another parenthetical comment, okay, like an insertion. King Og was the last remnant of the Rephaim, a people group of gigantic physical size. His bed was made of iron and was 13.5 feet long and 6 feet wide. Clearly, he was no puny king, and his takedown testifies to the truth that the Lord is no puny God. Israel need not worry about the size of the enemies they would have to face. They needed only to remember the size of their God. Well, that's a good little quote to put there. Don't look at the size of your enemy, but look at the size of your God.
I'm thinking too, even though he might be the last of the giants, he ruled over 60 cities. So
Yeah.
to your comment of who was he king over, if he was the last, I think he was probably a giant compared to most of the people in those other cities.
Yeah, he must have maybe inherited it. It's just normally like they would kill off, like if he didn't have any family, like who was in his court. And I think it would be interesting. All right. Any other notes that anybody has?
I thought it interesting that in MacArthur it said about that could have been a coffin.
Yeah.
That bedstead, was it something he didn't really sleep in, or did he sleep in it and they used it as a coffin, after the fact?
Yeah, I think it wouldn't have been uncommon to bury, like gold and things that if they believed in going into another lifetime, it wouldn't have been uncommon for them to bury things with them like the pharaohs did.
Right.
My Bible says the bed was a sarcophagus, which is a burial coffin.
Mm-hmm.
A what?
Is that an actual coffin, or is that like when we were in Rome? I feel like I heard this word before. When we were in Rome, you went down below the city into these tunnels, and there were these like carved out hallways, and then there were these carved out rooms to the side. And then inside these carved out rooms, there were shells, and the bodies would go on these shells. So instead of each person having a casket like we do, there would be rooms of shelves. How do you
Well,
spell that? Let's look it up. How do you?
when they found King Tut, he was in his sarcophagus, and it
Okay.
was very ornate. But I'll give you the spelling: SARCOPHAGUS. Yep.
Oh, okay. A stone coffin, typically adorned with a sculpture. Oh, okay. Now that makes sense. That's probably is where I saw it before.
And that's King Tut that they're showing.
Yeah, that's his coffin. I see what you mean. Interesting.
I've seen in movies where they will show a sarcophagus, and it's basically like Julie said, an ornate kind of thing, and
Yeah.
with a
And
lid.
it usually holds the mummified body.
Mm-hmm.
All right, are we ready to move on to the next section? Kathy, did you say yours goes through 25?
No, it goes through 20. It's not real long. It's entitled Division of the Land.
All right, Tony has through 20, so we could do that. Kim, do you want to read? Oh, is she there?
I'll read it.
Thank you,
I'm
Julie.
here.
Oh.
I couldn't get my mute off.
Ugh.
Okay. Dividing the land. At that time, I gave the conquered land to the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh. To the tribes of Reuben and Gad, I gave the area beginning at Aroer on the Arnon River, plus half of Mount Gilead, including its cities. The half tribe of Manasseh received the remainder of Gilead and all of the former kingdom of King Og, the Argob region. Bashan is sometimes called the land of the Rephaim. The clan of Jair of the tribe of Manasseh took over the whole Argob region, Bashan, to the borders of the Geshurites and Maacanthites. They renamed their country after themselves, calling it Havoth Jar, meaning Jar's villages, as it is still known today. Then I gave Gilead to the clan of Machir. The tribes of Reuben and Gad received the area extending from the Jabbok River of Gilead, which was the Ammonite frontier, to the middle of the valley of the Arnon River. They also received the Arabah, or wasteland, bounded by the Jordan River on the west, from Chinnereth to Mount Pisgah and the Dead Sea, also called the Sea of the Arabah. At that time, I reminded the tribes of Reuben and Gad and the half tribe of Manasseh that although the Lord had given them all the land, although the Lord had given them the land, they could not begin settling down until their armed men led the other tribes across the Jordan to the land the Lord was giving them. But your wives and children, I told them, may live here in the cities the Lord is giving you, caring for your many cattle until you return after the Lord has given victory to the other tribes too. When they conquer the land the Lord your God has given them across the Jordan River, then you may return here to your own land.
All right.
Chrissy in Worsby,
Yeah,
it takes it from 12 clear through 29 at the end. I don't know if you want to just go ahead and read the rest of that.
we can. Yeah, it's very short. Do you want to just
Yeah.
read the rest of it, Cam?
Yeah.
Okay. Moses' prayer to God. Then I said to Joshua, you have seen what the Lord your God has done to those two kings. You will do the same to all the kingdoms on the other side of the Jordan. Don't be afraid of the nations there, for the Lord your God will fight for you. At that time, I made this plea to God. Oh, Lord God, please let me cross over into the promised land, the good land beyond the Jordan River with its rolling hills and Lebanon. I want to see the result of all the greatness and power you have been showing us. For what God in all of heaven or earth can do what you have done for us? But the Lord was angry with me because of you and would not let me cross over. Speak of it no more, he ordered, but go to the top of Mount Pisgah, where you can look out in every direction, and there you will see the land in the distance. But you shall not cross the Jordan River. Commission Joshua to replace you, and then encourage him, for he shall lead the people across to conquer the land you will see from the mountaintop. So we remained in the valley near Beth Peor.
Aww.
I
I
know.
feel bad for, like, he's like, can I please go in?
Wow.
He said, no, but you can look.
Yeah, looky but don't touchy. Well, and then again, because you would not listen to me. Like he's
Like,
being punished for their,
Their disobedience.
yeah,
my Bible keeps saying, but the Lord was angry with me because of you.
yeah.
Mine does too.
Mm-hmm.
So because the Israelites were so disobedient, still God's holding Moses responsible for that.
Yeah, and even God saying, enough from you, do not speak to me on this matter again.
I think Moses was so frustrated with those people yammering him for water that he struck the rock instead of talking to it. They pushed him over the edge.
I don't know, like
And
that
then
would
that was
just,
his disobedience.
yeah, because of
Like
them.
me. The devil made him do
Yeah.
Mm.
All right, so we started what, 12?
Yeah.
All right, so 12, okay, mine jumps clear up to 20 in John. It says, rest, a peaceful situation with the land free from external threat and oppression. The eastern 2.5 tribes had the responsibility to battle alongside their western brother until the conquest was complete. Joshua 22. Then verse 22, the Lord your God himself fights for you. Moses commanded Joshua not to be afraid because the Lord himself would provide supernatural power and give them victory. And then you can read about that also in Joshua. And verse 23, I pleaded with the Lord. With the victories over Sihon and Og, Moses made one final passionate plea to the Lord to be allowed to enter the promised land. However, the Lord would not allow Moses that privilege. He did, however, allow Moses to go to the top of the Pisgah and see the land. And then jump to verse 29. Beth Peor is located east of the Jordan River, probably opposite of Jericho. And then it says see Numbers 22 through 25 for the background. And that's the end of John MacArthur for that.
Okay. This covers 3:12 to 29, Israel preparing. The victories over Sihon and Og, the two mighty kings of the lands east of the Jordan, were themselves preparation for battles Israel would fight when they arrived in Canaan. The new generation was getting its first real taste of warfare and was quickly discovering that Jehovah could be trusted to overcome every enemy. All that the army had to do was obey God's orders, trust his promises, and courageously confront the enemy. A second step of preparation for conquest was a settling of the 2.5 tribes in the territory that had been captured on the east side of the Jordan. This land was given to the tribes of Reuben and Gad and the half tribe of Manasseh. I think I'm missing something. What's this half tribe?
Well, see, the tribes had different, that's what like the first one said about Manasseh. So like the land that was being taken and then the tribes that were going to settle in them. Half tribe of Manasseh, was that Ephraim and let me look.
So what it's saying is just half of whatever that tribe was.
I think Manasseh was made up of 2.
Okay.
Let me look. Manasseh is one of 2 tribes named after Joseph.
So we don't know
That
what the
would have
other one
been,
is.
huh?
So we don't know what the other one is.
The other is Ephraim.
Oh, okay. All right. That connects.
So it's Manasseh and Ephraim.
Yeah, yeah, after the sons of Joseph. So Ephraim and Manasseh. Because remember, Joseph only had 2 kids to Rebecca? Rachel? I confused them. Remember, he was married to Leah, the one sister, and then Rachel, but he was actually in love with Rachel, and then Leah found favor, or God found favor with Leah and let her get pregnant. Rachel didn't get pregnant, but then Rachel died in childbirth and only had ever had 2 children.
Okay, that connects it then. They especially wanted this land because they were herdsmen and the territory was suitable for livestock. The 2.5 tribes were allowed to fortify the cities for their families to live in and also to build pens for their flocks and herds. But it was understood that the men of war in the tribes would cross the Jordan with the other tribes and help their brothers conquer the land. Once that was done and all the tribes had been assigned to their inheritance, the men of Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh could return home to their families. The fact that Moses gave them the land and that the men were willing to leave their loved ones behind was evidence of their faith that God would give Israel the victory in Canaan. Moses described this victory as the Lord giving rest, a phrase that is used again in chapter 12, verse 10, and chapter 25, verse 19.
What verse is that in? The
That's
rest?
in 3:20. It's in Deuteronomy 3:20, but then it's also in 12:10.
Oh, here it is. Until the Lord gives rest or victory.
And 25:19. And then it says, and frequently in Joshua, and it gives numerous references in Joshua where you can find that. The book of Hebrews picks up the phrase and applies it to the spiritual rest we have in Christ because we have trusted his finished work on the cross. And it has references for where that's found in Hebrews. Israel at Kadesh Barnea wanted to go back to Egypt, and the Jewish believers to whom Hebrews was written wanted to go back to the old life and the old religion. But there could be no rest in the Jewish religion that was about to pass off the scene, so the writer urged the people to go ahead by faith into the rest that only Christ can give, and that's found in Matthew. Canaan isn't a picture of heaven, it's a picture of our spiritual riches in Christ, the inheritance that we have in him. A third step of preparation for conquest was the appointment of Joshua to succeed Moses and lead the nation into Canaan. And that's found in Numbers. At the command of the Lord, Moses publicly laid hands on Joshua with the help of Eleazar, the high priest, consecrated him to his new office. Moses also began to hand over some of his authority to Joshua. So by the time Moses left the scene, Joshua was ready to take charge. However, Joshua was a man of great faith and experience and was fully qualified to lead God's people. He had served as Moses' servant and as a leader of the army. He had been on Sinai with Moses. At Kadesh Barnea, he proved his faith and obedience by standing with Moses and Caleb against the 10 spies and the whole unbelieving nation.
So did they give references for that? Like Joshua's basically his credentials? Is that what they're saying there?
Yeah, for where it says he served Moses as Moses' servant, that's in Exodus 33:11.
Hang on here, credentials. What is it? Exodus?
Yeah, Exodus 33:11.
Okay.
As the leader of the army, it has 17 verses 8 to 16. Now, I don't know if that means Exodus or that means Deuteronomy.
17.
Let me look here.
I'm going back there. 17 what?
8 through 16.
Oh. Pages are sticking together. 17, 8 through 16. If must be Exodus.
Just say that must be Exodus.
What was it again?
17, 8 through 16, and that was where he was the leader of the army.
Okay.
And then he had been on Sinai with Moses, and that says 24:13. So I'm assuming that's Exodus also.
Yeah. Okay. Is that it?
Yeah, well, it says at Kadesh Barnea, he proved his faith and obedience by standing with Moses and Caleb against the 10 spies. That would be what we just started to read here in Deuteronomy, I would think.
Deuteronomy.
Where was Kadesh Barnea? That would
That
probably
was
be,
back in like 2 and 3, wasn't it?
yeah, or 1 and 2, because we're in 3.
We're in the wilderness years. Yeah, it was like 2. I'm just gonna put Deuteronomy and then I'm gonna put spy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, where it talks about the spies is Deuteronomy 1, starting with 19. So that's probably somewhere in, yeah.
Okay. Pretty good credentials.
Okay. The only cloud over all this celebration of victory was that Moses wasn't permitted to enter the promised land because of his impetuous sin of striking the rock. And that's Numbers 21 through 13 and 27, 12 through 14.
Numbers, say that again, sorry.
Numbers 21 through 13 and 27, 12 through 14. But even this sad note brought with it a trumpet call of encouragement in what Moses said. O sovereign Lord, you have begun to show your servant your greatness and your strong hand. And that's Deuteronomy 3:24. As wonderful as Israel's victories had been so far, they were just a small expression of the greatness and power of God, and Moses didn't want to miss any of the magnificent things God was going to do in Canaan. The Lord wouldn't permit Moses to enter the land, but before Moses died, he was allowed to see the land from the top of Mount Pisgah. It has in parentheses Nebo. I think that means Nebo is another name, maybe for Mount Pisgah.
Oh, yeah.
And it has C 32, 48 to 52. I'm guessing that means Deuteronomy 32.
I think Nebo is still today. Let me look.
32, 48. Yeah, on that same day, the Lord told Moses, go up to the Abarim range to Mount Nebo in Moab, across from Jericho, and view Canaan, the land I am giving the Israelites as their possession.
It says current day Mount Nebo is located in the modern day country of Jordan.
Okay. Centuries later, Moses stood in the Holy Land in glory on Mount of Transfiguration with Jesus and Elijah, and that's found in Matthew. All that Moses said in the first part of his farewell address prepared the way for his exposition and application of God's law, for history and responsibility go together. God had done mighty things for the people, both in blessing them and in chastening them. The people of Israel had a responsibility to love God and obey his word. Throughout this address, Moses will frequently remind the Jews that they were privileged people, the people of God, separated unto the Lord from all the nations of the earth. It's when we forget our high calling that we descend into low living. The church today needs to catch up on the past and be reminded of all that the Lord has done for his people and all that his people have done and not done in the return for his blessings.
I like what he said. What did he say? Like something about high living.
It's when we forget our calling that we descend into low living.
When we forget our
when we
calling.
forget our high calling, that we descend into low living.
When we forget our high calling, we descend into, boy, and that's a truth.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh. Let's see where the church today needs to catch up on the past and be reminded of all that the Lord has done for his people and all that his people have done and not done in return for his blessings. If a new generation of believers is to march into the future in victory, they need to get back to their roots and learn again the basics of what it means to be the people of God. And that's it.
All right, I'm picking up on 3:12, right?
Yeah.
12 through 20. Moses then recounted the dividing of the Transjordan among the Reubenites and the Gadites and the half tribe of Manasseh. He has verse 12 and 13. These groups had asked to dwell on the east side of the Jordan rather than accompany the other tribes into Canaan. See Numbers 32, 1 through 42. Oh, so maybe half the tribe went into Canaan and the other half wanted to be over here. That might be why he's saying half tribe.
Oh, okay.
It says see Numbers 32, 1 through 42. Yet they promised to send soldiers to help their brothers conquer the promised land before returning home. Jar, a member of the tribe of Manasseh, was singled out for his valiant efforts in taking the land for his family. Verses 21 and 22. Next came a discussion regarding a transfer of leadership, something that must have been very difficult for Moses. He reminded Joshua of what he had seen with his own eyes. Israel had vanquished two kings, Sihon and Og, and captured their land, but there was a larger purpose in their destruction than mere land acquisition. The Lord would do the same to all the kingdoms they were about to enter. In other words, Moses said, don't worry about the enemies in the promised land, Joshua, because you've just seen what God can do to those who oppose him. Don't be afraid of them, for the Lord your God fights for you. You too can be courageous to follow God's will for your life because he has your back. Verse 23 through 25. Since he had disobeyed the Lord, Moses had been forbidden to enter the land. See Numbers 20, 1 through 13. But it seems the encouraging victories he had led in the Transjordan may have given him hope that God was open to changing his mind. So Moses, whose intercessory prayers had been effective previously, begged God to let him cross over and see the beautiful land. Verses 26 through 28. But God's no was indeed no. He, like a parent putting his foot down, said, that's enough. Do not speak to me again about this matter. All he allowed Moses to do was to ascend Mount Pisgah, or aka Nebo, and view the land from afar. Nevertheless, though Moses could not go with them, the Lord continued to provide leadership for his people. Joshua, mentioned now for the third time in the book, also seen in 138 and 321, would lead Israel and enable them to inherit the land. To inherit what God was giving them required obedience, and Joshua was the man for the job. The end of Tony.
It's just hard to believe that if all he did was strike that rock, and that's the one thing that kept him out.
One thing he did wrong. You had one
Yeah.
job. Yeah, it's hard to understand that. Must have been very, very significant. Now, Crazy Man that I listen to in the mornings. Remember I told you about Jacob and the rock that he laid on?
Mhm.
He he says that is the stone of scone, but he also believes that it is the rock that Moses hit.
Oh,
Don't ask me details. I don't understand. But I'm sure he has more teaching on it. He mentions it kind of in passing as he's teaching, and I thought that was really interesting. Would make the stone very significant, which also with like if this was Jacob's stone, and Moses struck it, that would might be why it's such a big deal.
And did you not say that that stone is what is under the
Coronation chairs
coronation chair now?
for England. But housed in Scotland.
How in the world would they identify this specific stone?
Yeah.
That just
Yeah, I don't know. He's very he's a historian too. So like he's like he reads like a lot of like the history of Scotland, the history of whatever. Like he understands and gets a lot of history. So he has he has he has somehow come to this conclusion that I can't explain, but it would make sense. Because I always thought in that story, like, why would they make a big point about him sleeping on this stone? Although he had the vision of a ladder going into heaven. Well, that ladder is Jesus, because Jesus is the only way to get into heaven. So that would have been a significant turning point. Because I always thought, well, I don't understand what the big deal is about this story, but that would make this a very significant story, and that stone a very significant stone.
See, I never thought about that ladder being Jesus. I just
Me
thought
either.
ladder,
Yeah.
just
Because he's like, they tried to build the Tower of Babel and build their way into, the into heaven, but the only way to get to heaven is through Jesus. So I think it would be interesting. I'm in Genesis with him, so I think it'll be interesting. Like, I just find all his teaching very interesting. I'm excited to also go to Revelation with him because he teaches differently than I've heard on that also, because he does not believe in the rapture. And
do
most
you think
people,
do you think they kept track of that rock from the beginning?
I don't know. I mean,
That
my guess would be as good as yours.
it was marked
So-
significant?
Well, it was marked
Why?
significant because they moved it. Because remember he set up an altar and so I'm sure that they tracked
So
it.
was Moses dragging it around with him and the Israelites?
Well, it would have
Or
been Jacob.
we just happened on the same location.
Maybe.
I don't know. Here's one last little reading thing in my Bible for chapter 3, verses 21 through 29. It says, the history of God's people in the Old Testament shows how unsure their standing was before God. The Israelites were people chosen by God, called to be his people. Additionally, God established clear requirements for the covenant relationship or the marriage. I added, or the marriage between himself and his people, requirements to atone for their human fallibility in light of his perfect holiness. He even appointed Moses to lead his people out of slavery in Egypt and to serve as a mediator between himself and his people, lest their sins cause his displeasure to negate this covenant relationship. Yet these clear requirements, means of atoning for unholiness, and an appointed mediator were not sufficient. Much like the Israelites, how tremendous are the sins of all people. No person can keep the covenant requirements of the relationship with God. As the Israelites' sin and unbelief led to judgment from God, all people's failure to have perfect faith and obedience makes them deserving of his displeasure as well. But Christians have a mediator who is far superior to Moses, one who keeps God's standard of perfection on their behalf. Whereas Moses was unable to ensure the Lord's favor as the leader of his people, Jesus enables believers to enter the presence of God with confidence, as their numerous sins were cast on him and his perfect righteousness was bestowed to them. Believers do not have to live in fear, afraid that one day God's promises will not come to pass, because in Jesus, God will not condemn those he calls to be his people. Through Jesus, the righteous requirements of the law are fulfilled. Jesus provides a sure standing before God, one that entails unending blessings as his people now and for all of eternity. History is so important, understanding history. And yeah, I think if we did an in-depth study on that stone and like history, like we would probably be able to track.
I'm intrigued by it now. I
Mhm.
don't know why. I don't know why.
Maybe Google it and see like if you can follow it
It's,
back through.
it's the stone of scone. That's what
Yeah,
it is.
Scone,
Okay.
the connection between Scotland and the British Empire or British, what do they call them? Monarchy.
Monoliths. Yeah.
Mhm.
All right.
Yeah,
I'm
you
gonna
can
have to do something.
let us
So
know what
that's-
you come up with.
That's from Jacob's dream, and that's the same rock that we think Moses struck.
Well, now he does say that's what he thinks.
Right.
But I mean, to me, like everything in the Bible has a purpose. Like every word has a purpose. So when they're talking about this random rock that Jacob sleeps on, also he said too, like it was normal for them to build a rock wall around them when they slept to protect them, which I thought was interesting too. But again, it's in passing as he's teaching other things. But yeah, very clearly has said that that stone is the stone of scone. So I do think there's significance. It's whether that's correct or not, I don't know. All right, I'm gonna stop recording. This concludes the reading of God's word for today, and we will pick back up at chapter 4. We managed to do a whole chapter.
Yay.
Chapter 4 tomorrow.